In the glittering heart of Manhattan, where the skyline pierced the autumn sky like a crown of silver spires, Danielle Harper stood on the rooftop of her family's penthouse feeling anything but regal. At 25, she was the undisputed queen of Harper Vineyards and Jewels, a sprawling empire of ruby-red Cabernets from Napa Valley and diamond necklaces that graced the necks of Hollywood starlets. Her skin, a warm mahogany glow under the string lights, caught the eye of every guest at her birthday gala. But tonight, as the city hummed below like a distant lullaby, Danielle felt hollow. It had been 5 years since her mother's passing, and the echo of that loss lingered in every toast, every forced smile. She was a woman who commanded boardrooms and red carpets, yet here surrounded by crystal flutes and jazz from a live quartet. She longed for something real, something that didn't shatter like fine china. The party was in full swing. Her father, David Harper, the silver-haired patriarch with his easy laugh and sharper business acumen, held court near the infinity pool. Charming investors with tales of their latest rosé launch. Friends in designer gowns swirled around their laughter, a polite veil over the undercurrent of envy Danielle had grown numb to. She sipped her own vintage Pinot Noir, the wine's velvet warmth doing little to thaw the chill in her chest. Another year older, she thought, and still chasing shadows of what love might feel like. Her last relationship, a whirlwind with a Wall Street broker, had ended in betrayal, leaving her wary of the honeyed words men whispered in the dark. That's when he arrived, Ethan Brooks. Not with fanfare, but with the quiet confidence of a man who knew the weight of secrets. He was the new hire her father had insisted on, a personal security detail, handpicked from some shadowy agency. Tall and broad-shouldered, with skin like polished oak and eyes the color of storm clouds, Ethan cut through the crowd like a blade through silk. Danielle had met him only once before, briefly, when he'd shadowed her father during a tense merger negotiation. She'd dismissed him then as just another suit competent, but forgettable. Now, as he approached with a small cloth-wrapped bundle under his arm, she felt an inexplicable pull, like gravity shifting beneath her heels. "Happy birthday, Ms. Harper," he said, his voice low and steady, carrying the faint drawl of the American South Georgia, maybe, or the Carolinas. He extended the bundle, and the guests fell into a hush, curious. Danielle arched a perfectly manicured brow, her full lips curving into a skeptical smile. A gift from the bodyguard. How thoughtful. She unwrapped it with deliberate slowness, the silk cloth falling away to reveal a chicken. A live, plump, Rhode Island red hen, its feathers a riot of chestnut and gold, clucking softly in confusion. Gasps rippled through the crowd, followed by stifled giggles. Danielle's cheeks burned, not with the wine, but with a fury that tasted like betrayal. "A chicken," she hissed, her voice slicing through the murmurs. "What the hell is this, Ethan? Some hillbilly joke at my expense?" The party teetered on the edge of chaos, her best friend Lila choking on her champagne, David's brow furrowing in concern. But Ethan didn't flinch. He met her gaze, those gray eyes holding hers with an intensity that made the city lights blur. "It's no joke, Danielle," he said softly, using her first name like it was a prayer. "This little one's name is Ruby. She's a survivor hatchling from a farm that nearly went under last winter. I raised her myself, bottle-fed her through storms that would have broken lesser souls. She's loyal, fierce, and she doesn't pretend to be anything she's not. Just like you." The words landed like a thunderclap. Danielle's hand trembled on the hen's soft back, the warmth of its body seeping through her fingers. Loyal, fierce, just like you. How dare he see through her armor so effortlessly? But before she could retort, Ethan leaned in closer, his breath warm against her ear. voice dropping to a whisper only she could hear. "And there's something you should know, Danielle. 5 years ago, the night your mother passed, I was there. Not as a bodyguard. I was the stranger your father called in the dark, the one who held his hand in that sterile hospital hallway while you grieved alone in the waiting room. He told me then, 'Save my legacy, Ethan, and watch over my girl.' I promised I would. But what he didn't know, what no one knows, is that I've been watching over you long before that. Because the first time I saw you at your mother's funeral, with tears carving rivers down those beautiful cheeks, I fell in love. Right there in the rain-slicked cemetery. And I've been hiding it ever since, pretending to be just the help. Because a man like me, a white boy from the wrong side of the tracks, now playing at being a billionaire in the shadows, doesn't deserve a queen like you. But tonight, Ruby's my way of saying, I'm done hiding. The question is, are you ready to see me?" The rooftop spun. Danielle's heart slammed against her ribs, a wild drumbeat, drowning out the jazz. A twist, sharp as a stiletto. Ethan Brooks wasn't just a bodyguard. He was a ghost from her deepest sorrow, a secret admirer, woven into the fabric of her loss. And worse or better, he claimed to love her, had loved her from the shadows of her grief. The hen clucked again as if in agreement, and Danielle's vision blurred with unshed tears. She thrust Ruby into the arms of a stunned waiter, her voice cracking like fine crystal. "Get this thing out of here." But as Ethan stepped back, his face, a mask of quiet resolve, she grabbed his arm, strong, unyielding, under her grip. You were there, all this time. Why didn't you say anything?" "Because love isn't a declaration at a party, Danielle," he replied, his thumb brushing her knuckles in a touch so tender it stole her breath. "It's in the quiet choices. The way I've rerouted your chauffeurs through Central Park on foggy mornings, knowing you need those stolen moments to breathe. The anonymous donations to that women's shelter in Harlem in your mother's name because I saw how her fire lived in you. I waited hoping you'd see me. Not the suit, not the shadows. Me." The guests pretended not to stare, but whispers swirled like the wind off the Hudson. David approached, his eyes flicking between them with dawning realization. "Ethan, what the devil?" But Danielle cut him off, her voice steady now, laced with the steel that had built empires. "Dad, did you know about this?" She waved a hand at Ethan, at the invisible threads of fate binding them. David sighed, aging a decade in seconds. "I knew he cared, sweetheart, more than cared. But the rest, that's his truth to tell, and yours to hear." She released Ethan's arm, but the imprint of his touch lingered a brand on her skin. The party fractured around her guests, drifting to the edges, giving her space. But Danielle felt exposed, raw, as if the city itself had peeled back her layers. She turned toward the railing, the Hudson River, a black ribbon below dotted with fairy lights, like fallen stars. Ethan followed, silent sentinel at her side. "I don't know what to feel," she admitted, her voice barely above the hum of traffic far below. "Angry, flattered, terrified. You've been my ghost, Ethan. How do I trust a man who's lied by omission for years?" He leaned against the rail, close enough that she could smell his cologne, sandalwood, and rain, grounding and wild. "You don't have to trust me tonight, or tomorrow. But let me show you Danielle. Let Ruby be the start, a silly feathered promise that not all surprises are cruel. Some are the kind that hatch into something unbreakable." She glanced back at the party, at the life she'd curated so meticulously. Power poise, isolation, masked as independence. And here was Ethan unraveling it all, with a chicken and a confession. Her mother's voice echoed in her mind. Love isn't found in the spotlight, darling. It's in the shadows waiting for you to step into the light. For the first time in years, Danielle felt that light warming her from within, tentative but true. She didn't push him away. Instead, she let her shoulder brush his, a silent invitation. As the quartet struck up, at last, Etta James's soulful croon wrapping around them like a shawl. Danielle turned to him. Tell me more. About that rainy day. About why a billionaire plays pretend. Ethan's smile was slow, devastating, a dimple flashing in his cheek like a secret shared. Only if you promise to dance with me. Right here under these ridiculous lights. She hesitated, then nodded her hand, slipping into his. As they swayed awkward at first, then fluid bodies remembering what hearts had long known, the twist of his revelation settled into something softer possibility. Love, it seemed, had been clucking in the corner all along, waiting for her to listen. And dear friends, as the stars wheeled over Manhattan that night, remember this. In the quiet after the storm of our youth, when the world feels a little too loud and our hearts a little too guarded, sometimes the greatest love arrives, not with fanfare, but with a feather-light touch, a reminder that it's never too late to let someone in to rewrite the story of your tomorrows with the ink of yesterday's unspoken dreams. What if just tonight you whispered to your own heart, I'm ready to see? Hold that whisper close. It might just hatch into magic. The morning after the rooftop revelation dawned crisp and unforgiving over Manhattan, the kind of October light that slanted through the penthouse windows like a gentle scolding from the sun. Danielle Harper woke with the faint ache of too much Pinot and too many truths, her silk sheets tangled around her like unspoken regrets. Ruby the hen had been quietly rehomed to a rooftop coop in Brooklyn, courtesy of Ethan's swift arrangements, but the bird's clucks echoed in her mind, a feathered reminder of the man who'd upended her carefully curated world. She padded to the floor-to-ceiling windows, gazing at the East River's lazy shimmer, and felt the weight of it all. Her mother's absence, the empire she'd inherited, like a crown of thorns. And now, this, Ethan Brooks with his storm-gray eyes and confessions that lingered like smoke. By noon, she'd made her decision. Not out of whimsy, but necessity wrapped in spite. The party whispers had already seeped into the tabloids, a blurry photo of her clutching his arm, captioned with salacious speculation about the heiress and her mysterious guard. If Ethan wanted to play the long game, she'd turn it into a battlefield of her own design. Over a hurried breakfast of avocado toast and black coffee in the sun-drenched kitchen, she cornered her father David, his reading glasses perched on the bridge of his nose as he scanned the Wall Street Journal. "Dad," she said, her voice steady as the Hudson's current. "Hire him. Full-time. Personal security. Starting today." David lowered the paper, his blue eyes faded echoes of the vibrant hue they'd shared with her late mother searching her face. "Ethan, after last night, sweetheart, that boy's been more than a shadow to us since, well, you know. But if you're sure..." "I'm sure." She cut in a flicker of that old fire in her chest. "He thinks he can waltz in with poultry and poetry, fine. Let him earn it. Every step, every errand. He'll learn what it means to stand in my light." David chuckled softly, the sound warm and worn, like the leather armchairs in his study, where they'd hashed out mergers over midnight chess games. "Ah, Danny, you're your mother's daughter, fierce as a Napa frost, but with a heart that thaws come spring. Just don't break him. Or yourself." He reached across the marble island, squeezing her hand, his touch carrying the quiet strength that had anchored her through eulogies and estate settlements. In that moment, she glimpsed the boy he'd been once courting Isabella under starlit vineyards, promising forever in a world that rarely kept such vows. It softened her edges just enough. Ethan arrived at 2, impeccable, in a charcoal suit that hugged his frame without apology, a leather satchel slung over one shoulder. No trace of last night's vulnerability lingered in his posture. He was all professional poise, the dimple in his cheek hidden like a locked drawer. "Ms. Harper," he greeted, nodding to David before turning to her. "Ready for the day?" "Call me Danielle," she replied coolly, grabbing her oversized tote, stuffed with mood boards for the winter jewelry line, and a dog-eared copy of her mother's journal. "And yes, we're heading to the Brooklyn studio. Photo shoot for Vogue. You'll carry the bags. All of them." His lips twitched, the barest hint of amusement. "As you wish. Though, if we're dispensing with formalities, it's Ethan. No Mr. Brooks nonsense. We're in this dance now, remember?" She ignored the warmth creeping up her neck, striding toward the private elevator, as if his words were mere echoes off the marble floors. The ride down was silent, charged with the hum of descent, the city unfolding below like a map of possibilities she wasn't ready to trace. In the black SUV idling curbside, a sleek Escalade with tinted windows and reinforced plating, Ethan slid into the driver's seat, his hands steady on the wheel. Danielle settled in the back, scrolling emails on her phone, but her eyes betrayed her flicking to the rearview mirror, where his gaze met hers, brief and electric. The drive through Midtown traffic was a masterclass in restraint. Horns blared like impatient suitors. Pedestrians darted like fireflies in the crosswalks. Danielle tested him first, with the small things. "Stop at that artisanal bakery on 57th. I need those lavender macarons for the crew, of course." He did, returning with the pastel confections in a crisp box, not a crumb displaced. Then bolder. "Detour to the Diamond District. I forgot my backup sketches." Ethan navigated the labyrinth of 47th Street's jewelry stalls with the ease of a man who'd once appraised heirlooms in backroom auctions, handing her a portfolio without a word of complaint. By the time they reached the waterfront studio in Dumbo, its exposed brick walls framing views of the Manhattan Bridge, like a postcard from another life, Danielle's arsenal was in full swing. The photo shoot was for a spread on Empowered Elegance. Her in emerald silk gowns that draped like liquid night over her curves, jewels from the family vault, catching the strobes like captured stars. The crew buzzed stylists pinning her curls into elegant twists, the photographer barking angles from behind his Hasselblad. Ethan hovered at the periphery, arms laden with garment bags lighting kits, and a cooler of chilled rosé, her rosé, the one she'd personally blended in Napa last summer, a tribute to her mother's secret recipe of blackberries and whispers of vanilla. "Over here," she called during a break, perched on a velvet chaise in a robe that slipped just enough to tease. The velvet pouch now. He crossed the room in 3 strides, placing it in her palm, with a deference that bordered on intimate. Their fingers brushed, and there it was again, that spark like static from a wool sweater on a winter's eve. She pulled away too quickly, delving into the pouch for a sapphire pendant, but her pulse betrayed her, a soft tattoo against her throat. "You're relentless," he murmured later, as she directed him to fetch iced lattes from the corner cafe. The wind off the East River whipped her robe's hem, and she shivered despite the midday sun. Ethan shrugged off his jacket without fanfare, draping it over her shoulders. It smelled of him clean linen and that elusive sandalwood, and weighed like an anchor, grounding her in the chaos. Relentless. She shrugged it off, handing it back with a glare that didn't quite land. "This is my life, Ethan. Chaos is the price of the crown. If you can't handle a few bags, I can handle anything you throw at me," he interrupted gently, his voice threading through the distant clatter of rails on the bridge. Bags, boardrooms, or broken hearts. But Danielle, this isn't about proving yourself to me. It's about letting someone carry the load for once. She paused, the latte cup warm in her hands, steam curling like question marks. In the 5 years since Isabella's quiet battle with cancer had ended in a hospice overlooking the vineyards, her mother's hand frail, in hers whispering, "Find joy in the thorns, my love." Danielle had shouldered it all. The mergers that saved the company from a brutal recession, the late nights forging alliances with Parisian jewelers, the solitary Christmases where she'd toast to ghosts with a single flute of champagne. Men had come and gone, charming executives who saw her as a conquest, artists who romanticized her strength until it scared them off. None had lingered in the quiet spaces, the ones where grief pooled like rain in the gutters. But Ethan, he saw the spaces. As they drove back that evening, gridlock turning the FDR drive into a river of brake lights, a sudden downpour lashed the windshield. Thunder grumbled overhead, the sky splitting open as if to mirror the crack in her resolve. The wipers slashed rhythmically, and Danielle watched the droplets race, her reflection fragmented in the glass. "Pull over," she said abruptly, her voice smaller than intended. The shoulder was narrow, flanked by jersey-bound semis, but Ethan complied without question, easing the SUV to a halt. Rain hammered the roof like impatient fingers on a telegraph key. She unbuckled, stepping out into the deluge before he could protest. The water soaked her instantly, curls frizzing into wild halos, blouse clinging like a second skin. It was foolish, reckless, the kind of impulse her mother would have indulged with a knowing smile and a shared umbrella. Ethan followed, jacket held aloft like a makeshift shield, but she waved him off. "Why?" she demanded, rain streaming down her face, mingling with something saltier. "Why hide all these years, rerouting cars, anonymous checks? Were you just waiting for me to notice? Or was it pity for the girl who lost her anchor?" He stepped closer, the rain forging them into a private world amid the storm's roar. Water beaded on his lashes, darkening his hair to midnight. Pity. The word hung between them, absurd in its lightness. No, Danielle. Admiration. The kind that roots deep like those old vines in Napa, twisted by drought, but unbreakable. "I saw you at the funeral." "Yes." Umbrella in one hand, your father's arm in the other, holding it together when the world cracked wide. "And I thought, there's a woman who doesn't just survive. She blooms. I've built fortunes in tech, shadows, algorithms that predict markets, apps that connect souls across oceans. But nothing prepared me for you." Hiding, it was self-preservation. A man like me, raised on grit and grace in Savannah's salt marshes, doesn't court a Harper without earning the right. But last night, that was me staking my claim. Not on your empire, on your heart. The thunder rolled again, softer now, a celestial applause. Danielle searched his face, the lines etched there not from age, but from quiet battles, the kind that forged character in the fires of boardrooms and backroads. In his eyes, she saw echoes of her father, in his courting days, steadfast, unshowy, the sort of love that didn't dazzle but endured, like the slow pour of a fine Cabernet, revealing layers with time. She reached up, tracing the rain from his jaw, her thumb lingering on the pulse that matched her own. "You're a fool, Ethan Brooks." She whispered the words, half lost to the wind. "A billionaire fool with a hen for a wingman." His laugh was low, rumbling like the storm's retreat, a sound that wrapped around her ribs and squeezed. Guilty. But fools have their moments. He tilted her chin, his touch feather light, and for a heartbeat, the world narrowed to the space between them, rain-slick skin, shared breath, the tentative bridge of possibility. They returned to the car, drenched and wordless, the silence companionable now, laced with the promise of uncharted paths. As Manhattan's lights flickered alive against the dusk beacons, in the gathering dark, Danielle leaned her head against the seat, Ethan's jacket reclaimed across her lap. The errand of the day had shifted subtly from retribution to reconnaissance. She wasn't ready to surrender her thorns, not yet. But in the quiet hum of tires on wet asphalt, she allowed herself a stolen breath. Perhaps, just perhaps, this man might be the rain her garden had been waiting for. The days following the rain-soaked drive blurred into a tentative rhythm, like the first tentative notes of a sonata after a long silence. Danielle Harper found herself navigating the penthouse corridors with a newfound awareness, as if the walls themselves had eyes. Ethan's eyes, watchful and warm, lingering just a beat too long in the morning light. He was there at dawn, coffee brewing in the sleek espresso machine, black as midnight, and strong enough to chase away the ghosts of sleepless nights. For the road ahead, he'd say, handing her the mug with fingers that brushed hers like a secret shared in code. She accepted it without protest. Now the steam rising between them, a veil for the questions she wasn't ready to voice. What are we? Ethan allies in this elegant war, or something softer, more perilous? Her schedule that week was a gauntlet of obligations, the kind that had forged her into the woman who could stare down venture capitalists over lunch at Le Bernardin without flinching. Tuesday brought a high-stakes meeting at the Harper offices in Midtown, a glass-walled eyrie overlooking Bryant Park, where the leaves turned gold like spilled coins from autumn's purse. Danielle arrived early as always, her navy power suit tailored to skim her curves like a lover's whisper, a single emerald brooch at her throat, an heirloom from her mother, its facets catching the light like captured fireflies. Ethan shadowed her through the revolving doors, his presence a subtle bulwark against the lobby's bustle of suited strangers and the faint undercurrent of envy that trailed her like perfume. The conference room hummed with anticipation projections, danced on screens. Bottles of chilled Harper Rosé, sweating condensation on the sideboard. And there at the head of the table was Nathan Ellis, mid-40s, with the polished sheen of old money and a smile that promised both partnership and peril. His family owned a chain of boutique hotels strung like pearls from Miami to Montreal. And today he pitched a collaboration co-branded retreats in Napa, where guests could sip vintage Cabernets amid vineyard sunsets adorned with Harper jewels. Nathan's gaze lingered on Danielle as he spoke, his words laced with admiration that bordered on possession. Your vision, Ms. Harper, it's intoxicating, like that first sip of a forbidden vintage, bold and unforgettable. She nodded, pen tapping a staccato rhythm on her notepad, her mind dissecting his proposal with the precision of a sommelier uncorking a rare bottle. Ethan stood by the door, arms crossed his face, impassive as marble. But Danielle caught the flicker in his jaw, the way his eyes narrowed when Nathan leaned forward, gesturing animatedly, his cufflinks glinting like tiny daggers. Professional courtesy, she told herself, ignoring the warmth pooling in her chest at Ethan's subtle tension. The meeting wrapped with handshakes and exchanged cards, Nathan's lingering on hers, his thumb grazing her knuckles. Dinner, he murmured as the others filed out. To toast the future. Nobu, 8 o'clock. She hesitated the invitation, a velvet trap, flattering, yet laced with the familiar script of men who saw her empire as the ultimate prize. Business only, Martiter Ellis. But yes, let's see where this vintage leads. Ethan drove her home in silence, the SUV slicing through the afternoon haze, like a shadow detaching from the sun. The radio murmured low jazz, Ella Fitzgerald's velvet timbre, weaving through the leather-scented air, but it did little to ease the knot between Danielle's shoulders. "Something on your mind?" she ventured finally, watching his reflection in the mirror. Strong hands on the wheel, knuckles whitening at the turns. He glanced back, his smile tight as a drawn bowstring. "Just ensuring the route's clear. Midtown can be unpredictable." The pause hung heavy unspoken words, threading the space between seats like invitations from men who look at you like a merger waiting to be sealed. That evening, as twilight bled into the sodium glow of Manhattan's streets, Danielle stepped into Nobu with the poise of a woman who'd danced this tango before. Her black sheath dress hugged her like midnight silk diamonds at her ears, winking like conspirators. Nathan waited at a corner booth, a bottle of sake already breathing, his tie loosened in that calculated way that suggested intimacy without effort. Ethan claimed a table across the room, half obscured by a shoji screen, nursing a club soda with lime, his gaze a steady beacon she felt more than saw. The dinner unfolded like a well-rehearsed play. Nathan regaled her with tales of hotel galas in Santorini, his laughter rich and resonant eyes tracing the line of her collarbone as he poured. "You're not just running an empire, Danielle, you're creating one. Isabella would be proud." The mention of her mother casual probing sent a shiver through her, like wind through Napa's bare vines in winter. How did he know? That tone, that intimate lilt. She steered the conversation to logistics distribution channels, profit shares, the rosé's subtle blackberry notes evoking Tuscan hills. But beneath the boardroom banter, his compliments flowed like honeyed wine, too sweet, too insistent, until she excused herself to the powder room, the mirror reflecting a woman caught between flattery and fatigue. Returning, she nearly collided with a waiter's sake spilling in a dark arc. Nathan rose instinctively, his hand steadying her elbow, fingers warm and proprietary. "Steady now," he said, voice low, pulling her closer than necessary. The air thickened, charged with the restaurant's hum-clink of chopsticks, murmur of deals being struck. And then, from the shadows, Ethan's voice cut through, calm as a summer sea before the squall. "Everything all right here, Ms. Harper?" Nathan's grip tightened fractionally before releasing his smile, cooling like sake left too long on ice. "Just a spill, Brooks. We've got it handled." But Danielle stepped back, her skin prickling under the weight of two men's regard, one appraising the other, protective, fierce as a hawk's shadow over prey. The rest of the meal passed in a haze of polite deflections, Nathan's charm fraying at the edges like silk exposed to salt air. When the check came, he insisted, slipping his card to the server with a flourish. "To new beginnings," he toasted, eyes locking on hers. Danielle raised her glass, but her thoughts drifted to the man across the room, his solitude, a silent rebuke. As they parted on the sidewalk, Nathan's parting kiss, hovering too near her cheek, Ethan materialized at her side, umbrella unfurling against the evening drizzle, like a shield. The walk to the SUV was wordless, the rain pattering a confidential rhythm on the nylon. Once inside, the warmth enveloped them, a cocoon against the city's relentless pulse. "He touches you like he owns the deed," Ethan said finally, voice roughened by restraint, pulling into traffic with deliberate care. Danielle turned the dashboard lights, casting his profile in chiaroscuro angles, sharpened by unspoken storms. "Jealous." The word escaped lighter than intended teasing, but laced with the vulnerability of a woman who'd learned to armor her heart against such tempests. He exhaled a sound like sails, luffing in wind. "Not of him. Of the ease you give him, the smiles, the glances. I've waited years for a fraction of that, Danielle." watching from the wings while you shine. It's not envy of his boardroom polish. It's the ache of knowing I could offer you sunsets over Savannah Marsh's quiet mornings with no agendas. But I hold back because rushing a woman like you is like forcing a vintage ruins the depth. Her breath caught the city lights streaking past like shooting stars in reverse. In the 5 years since Isabella's last breath, whispered over a hospice bed, amid the scent of wilting lilies, Danielle had built walls of deals and diamonds, mistaking solitude for strength. Men like Nathan saw the crown, the sparkle. They chased the reflection, not the woman beneath. But Ethan, he saw the vines, the roots twisted by drought, yet yielding the sweetest fruit. The realization bloomed slow like dawn over the Hudson, warming the hollows. Grief had carved. They'd barely turned onto Park Avenue when chaos erupted, a figure lunging from the alley shadows. Blade glinting under street lamps like a shard of broken promise. Time fractured Nathan's shout, the scrape of leather soles on pavement. Danielle's world narrowing to the cold kiss of steel inches from her throat. Ethan moved like liquid night, tackling the assailant in a blur of muscle and menace, the knife skittering into the gutter. Punches landed dull thuds amid grunts, the attacker scrambling free, vanishing into the throng. By the time sirens wailed in the distance, Nathan had pulled Danielle to her feet, his arms a cage of concern. "My God, are you hurt? I had him. I pushed you clear." His face was ashen, eyes wide with the hero's glow. But Danielle's gaze searched the crowd, heart pounding, not from fear, but absence. Where was Ethan? He reappeared minutes later, coat torn at the elbow, breath ragged from the chase. "Lost him in the subway," he gasped, eyes scanning her like a map for hidden reefs. "Police are en route. You're safe." No bravado, just quiet ferocity, his hand hovering near her arm, offering, not claiming. Nathan clapped his shoulder, the gesture brotherly. "Good work, Brooks. Couldn't have done it without you." But Danielle saw the flicker in Ethan's eyes, the unspoken, "I did it for her, not your applause." In the aftermath, statements to detectives under the fluorescent buzz of a precinct coffee machine, Danielle watched them, Nathan polished and poised, recounting the tale with dramatic flair. Ethan silent sentinel, his gaze a tether, pulling her back from the edge. As they emerged into the pre-dawn hush, Nathan offering to escort her home. For safety's sake, she demurred, turning to Ethan. "He's my ride, always has been." The drive uptown was a vigil of velvet quiet, the city slumbering under sodium halos. Danielle broke it first, her voice a thread in the dark. "You vanished. I thought—" She trailed off the words too raw, like exposing vein to air. "Never far," he murmured. Hand shifting on the gear shift, close enough to bridge the console if she dared. "I'd chase shadows across burrows, for you, Danielle. Not because it's my job, because in the flicker of that blade all I saw was the life I haven't yet claimed, the one where I wake to your laugh, not just guard it from afar." She reached then, her palm covering his, the contact a spark in the gloom. No declarations, no tempests, just the steady pulse of possibility sinking like heartbeats in the rain. Outside the penthouse glowed like a beacon promising rest renewal. But in that suspended moment, Danielle glimpsed the horizon, love not as a crown to wear, but a garden to tend thorns and all. And for the first time she wondered if she might let this man help her plant the seeds. The precinct's fluorescent hum lingered in Danielle Harper's ears long after the detectives had released them, a sterile drone that mirrored the hollow ache settling in her chest. Dawn crept over the skyline like a hesitant visitor painting the Hudson in strokes of rose and ash. But sleep had eluded her. Curled in the penthouse's oversized armchair, its velvet worn soft, from years of her mother's quiet evenings. Danielle traced the emerald brooch's facets, with a fingertip each glint, a fleeting memory of Isabella's laughter, echoing through Napa's sun-dappled rose. The attack replayed in fragments, the blade's cold gleam. Nathan's grip like a vice, Ethan's shadow vanishing into the night. Safe now, yes. Barricaded behind steel doors, and a security detail doubled by David's decree. But the violation clung like damp wool, a reminder that even queens could bleed. Ethan moved through the rooms, like a gentle tide brewing chamomile in the kitchen and leaving it steaming on the side table without a word. He didn't press for details, didn't hover with questions that scraped at fresh wounds. Instead, he settled on the sofa opposite, a leather-bound volume of Frost's poetry, open on his lap. The road not taken, the pages dog-eared, from countless solitary nights. 2 roads diverged in a yellow wood. He read softly, his voice a low timbre that wove through the morning's hush like smoke from a distant chimney. Danielle lifted her gaze, the words landing like balm on sun-chapped skin. Frost had been her mother's favorite, recited over porch swings in the vineyard's twilight, a ritual of choices made and mourned. She shifted, drawing her knees up the silk robe pooling around her like spilled ink. You chase ghosts in the rain and then quote poetry. Who are you? Ethan Brooks. The question carried no bite, only the weariness of a woman who'd armored herself against the world's sharp edges, only to find them dulled in his presence. He closed the book, setting it aside with deliberate care, his gray eyes holding hers across the divide of Persian rug and unspoken fears. The man who knows what it's like to lose the ground beneath you. My mother Erica, she's been fighting shadows of her own for years now. Ovarian cancer stage 3 when they caught it. I'd built my little tech fiefdom in Silicon Valley by then, algorithms that could predict market crashes, but not the one in her lungs. I sold it all board seats, stock options to fund trials in Boston, then experimental therapies in Zurich. Left the penthouses for her clapboard house in Savannah, where the marsh winds carry salt and stories. She's in remission now, fragile as a spider's web, but fierce mending nets for the local fishermen, because idleness chafes her soul. Watching her taught me love isn't a fortress. It's the bridge you build when the river rises. Danielle's throat tightened, the brooch suddenly heavy against her skin. Isabella's illness had been a thief in the night, silent, relentless, stealing breaths and dreams, until only echoes remained. She'd buried her grief in ledgers and launches, mistaking motion for healing. But here was Ethan laying bare his scars without fanfare, not to elicit pity, but to say, I see you in the quiet places where it hurts most. And the attack. She whispered the words, slipping free like leaves in an autumn gust. You didn't hesitate. Why risk yourself for someone who's made your life a gauntlet of grudges? His smile was slow shadowed by the stubble silvering his jaw, a man's face, etched by choices that had cost him dearly. Because grudges are just love, turned inside out, Danielle. Sharp edges where there could be silk. I've carried yours, like a badge, knowing one day you'd hand me the key to turn them smooth. He rose then, crossing to her in unhurried strides, kneeling before the chair, with the grace of a man who'd once knelt in hospital corridors, bargaining with fates kinder than his own. His hand found hers, thumb tracing the sapphire ring her mother had slipped on her finger. At 16, a promise of inheritance of roots that ran deep as river clay. They stayed like that through the morning's gold words, giving way to the language of touch. His palm warm against her knuckles, her fingers threading through his hair. Dark waves still damp from the night's chase. No grand gestures, no fevered kisses, just the steady cadence of breaths, sinking like vines entwining after a long winter's frost. By midday, the world intruded, David's call voice, gravel rough with concern, insisting on a lockdown, private investigators swarming like bees to honey. Stay in, Danny. Let Ethan handle the perimeter. This isn't random, feels too pointed, like a message from the shadows. She agreed, but isolation chafed a cage of crystal and steel. Ethan suggested a diversion, her mother's journal tucked in the study, like a forgotten letter. They pored over it that afternoon, seated cross-legged on the Aubusson carpet, amid scattered pages yellowed with time. Isabella's script flowed like the rosé she'd perfected, elegant loops recounting vineyard harvests, the birth of a filly under April stars, and quieter confessions. David's eyes light up when Danielle laughs. It's the vintage I cherish most. Laughter bubbled up unexpectedly, Danielle's head falling to Ethan's shoulder as they read of her toddler tantrums over muddied hems. She saw me even then, Danielle murmured, tracing a faded ink blot. Not the heiress, just me. Ethan's arm slipped around her waist, a natural arc, like the curve of a river stone smoothed by years. She saw the bloom before the thorn, and so do I. The words hung luminous until his phone buzzed a reminder. Innocuous. Erica. Don't forget your day, son. Marsh mud pies await. Danielle caught the date, the quiet milestone. Ethan's birthday. 38 tomorrow, uncelebrated in the press of their tangled lives. The idea sparked like flint on steel. By evening, with David's blessing and a discreet caterer, the penthouse transformed not into gala excess, but intimate alchemy. Fairy lights strung like fireflies along the terrace, a low table laden with low-country fare. Shrimp and grits, simmered slow cornbread, golden as Savannah sunsets, and a single bottle of Harper's rarest port, decanted to breathe like old secrets. Ethan returned from a perimeter sweep at dusk, coat dusted with the first autumn leaves, and paused in the doorway. Gray eyes widening at the scene, her, in a simple cashmere sweater the color of aged cognac candles, flickering like hearthglow. You planned this? His voice cracked boyish in its wonder, the billionaire facade slipping to reveal the son who'd once skipped stones across marsh creeks with his father before the sea claimed him in a squall. For the man who chases shadows and quotes Frost. She replied, stepping close, the port's ruby depth mirrored in her gaze. And because life's too fleeting for unremarked days, call your mother. Let her see. Erica arrived via video from Georgia, her face a map of lines, earned in laughter and loss, silver hair pinned with a seashell comb. My boy's grown into quite the guardian. She teased, her drawl thick as molasses as Ethan balanced the tablet on the table, pouring measures of port. They toasted to remissions, to roots that held fast, and Danielle felt the warmth spread not just from the wine, but from the weave of lives intersecting Erica's tales of Ethan's childhood mischief, like rigging a treehouse with salvaged circuit boards. Danielle's shy admission of the journal's hidden recipes, a blackberry cordial, Isabella had whispered over sickbed linens. As the screen dimmed, Erica's parting words lingered. Hold him close, dear. Men like mine and now yours. Love like the tide, fierce but faithful. Ethan turned to Danielle, then the terrace air crisp with fallen oak stars pricking the velvet sky. This, you, it's more than I deserved. His hand cupped her cheek thumb, brushing the curve of her lip, and she leaned into it, the world narrowing to the salt of his skin, the faint stubble grazing her palm. Their kiss unfolded slow, inevitable as dusk yielding to night, a brush of lips tentative, then deepening like a vintage uncorked after years, in cellar dark. His arms encircled her strong as the oaks shading Savannah lanes, and she melted against him. grief's sharp edges blunted by this new tenderness. No urgency, no conquest. Just the quiet unfurling of trust petals after prolonged rain. But dawn brought thorns. David's urgent knock shattered the fragile peace, his face ashen, as he thrust a tablet into her hands. The New York Times headline screamed, "Betrayal. Harper heir's father accused of secret family illegitimate son seeks stake in empire." Photos splashed across the screen. David younger, arm in arm, with a woman, Marissa Ellis, Nathan's mother, in a grainy 90s snapshot from a Napa fundraiser. Accompanying it, a DNA report purportedly irrefutable, claiming Nathan as David's blood demanding half the vineyards, the jewel vaults, the penthouse's very foundations. "It's fabricated," David rasped, voice cracking like dry earth. "Marissa, a fleeting mistake, post-engagement jitters before your mother. But this forged all of it. Nathan's playing a long con, darling. To what end?" Danielle's world tilted, the port's warmth curdling to ice in her veins. Nathan charming, insistent. Nathan now cast as brother thief, the specter unraveling her lineage like a pulled thread. She scrolled numb, the article's venom seeping. Sources close to the Ellis family allege a cover-up spanning decades, with young Danielle complicit in the deception. Betrayal twisted in her gut. Not just David's past, but the attack's shadow lengthening. Had Nathan orchestrated it? A ploy for hero's grace. Ethan entered, then alerted by the raised voices, his face hardening as he read over her shoulder. "This ends now," he said, voice steel-wrapped silk pulling her to her feet. "We'll unravel it thread by thread. But Danielle, look at me." She did, tears blurring his features to impressionist strokes. "You're not complicit. You're the root that holds us all. And I'll be damned if I let envy uproot what your mother planted." In that vow, amid the scandal's roar, Danielle glimpsed resilience, not the brittle kind she'd worn like armor, but the deep, enduring sort her mother had embodied. Love as anchor, fierce and forgiving. As David paced phone to ear, summoning lawyers like avenging angels, she clung to Ethan's hand, the bridge between them steady against the rising flood. Secrets exposed were wounds, yes, but in their bleeding, they promised healing if only she dared tend the garden. The New York Times headline lingered like a bruise on Danielle Harper's soul, its ink bleeding into every corner of the penthouse as morning light filtered through the shears. She stood at the kitchen island, fingers wrapped around a mug of cooling Earl Grey, her mother's morning ritual, steeped strong with a twist of lemon to cut the bitterness. The steam had long since dissipated, mirroring the fog in her mind. Nathan Ellis. The polished suitor turned phantom brother. His mother's ghost from David's youth, now clawing at the foundations she'd toiled to fortify. 5 years of widow's work nights bent over spreadsheets in the vineyard's guest house. Her mother's sapphire ring glinting under the desk lamp like a talisman against despair, threatened to unravel in a single venomous scoop. And yet, amid the fury coiling in her belly, like oversteeped tea, a quiet resolve bloomed she would not shatter. Not like the fine Limoges her mother had once dropped, in a rare moment of grief, only to gather the shards and melt them into a mosaic pendant that now hung at Danielle's throat, a testament to mending what was broken. Ethan found her there, his footsteps soft on the slate floors, carrying the faint scent of rain-damp wool from an early jog along the reservoir. He'd insisted on the routine motion to clear the head. He said a habit honed in Savannah's misty dawns, where marsh fog muffled the world's cruelties. "David's en route with the lawyers," he said, sliding onto the stool beside her, his knee brushing hers in that unassuming way that sent a shiver through her, like wind through Napa's Cabernet vines. No platitudes, no hurried reassurances, just his presence solid as the oak barrels aging in the cellar, a silent vow that he would shoulder the tempest with her. They moved as a unit that day, a quiet armada against the storm, first to the Harper legal suite in Midtown, a fortress of mahogany and muted greens, where David's counsel, a silver-maned veteran named Eleanor Voss, with pearls like river pearls, and a gaze sharp as heirloom shears, laid out the battlefield. "The DNA's a forgery," Eleanor declared, her voice a measured cello note as she slid folders across the polished table. Fabricated markers sloppy enough for a rush job, but clever in its mimicry. Marissa Ellis, Nathan's mother, was indeed a chapter in David's life, a brief interlude after your parents' engagement frayed under Napa's relentless sun. Heartbreaks rebound, nothing more. But this, it's extortion dressed as legacy, timed to coincide with your winter launch. They want the vineyard's lion's share, those hillside plots Isabella hand-tended, where the soil sings of blackberry and sun-warmed earth. Danielle traced the folder's edge, the paper crisp under her nail visions, flickering her mother on her knees in the dirt, skirts muddied humming spirituals, as she coaxed life from reluctant clay. Isabella with her, laugh like wind chimes in a summer breeze, had turned those rows into a symphony rosés that whispered of forgiveness cabs, that roared of unyielding grace. To cede them to Nathan's grasping hands felt like exhuming her anew, bone by bone. "And the attack?" Danielle asked, her voice steady, though her pulse thrummed like a distant drum. Eleanor's eyes softened, the lines around them deepening like furrows in fallow ground. "Linked, we suspect. A staged heroism to endear Nathan, soften you toward the family claim. We've subpoenaed his financials, shell companies routing funds to a private eye in Queens. But we need hard proof. A blood test, public and unassailable. Force their hand." Ethan's hand found the small of her back, then a fleeting anchor amid the legal lexicon's tide. "We'll get it," he murmured low enough for only her ears, his breath stirring the loose curl at her temple. In that touch, she felt the echo of their terrace kiss, the slow unfurling, like a vintage, decanted to breathe, revealing notes of oak and hidden cherry. No grand heroics now, just the quiet partnership of two souls who'd weathered their own silences, learning to harmonize. The confrontation brewed over coffee in a Soho cafe that afternoon, a neutral ground of exposed brick, and the rich perfume of Ethiopian roasts, far from the penthouse's gilded cage, close enough to the pulse of the city to remind her she was alive, unbroken. Nathan arrived punctual, his Burberry trench slung over one arm like a conqueror's cloak, his smile a veneer of concern, cracking at the edges. "Danielle, darling, this madness in the press. It's a shock, isn't it? But family. It finds a way." He slid into the booth, ordering a flat white, with the ease of a man who assumed the world bent to his latte art. She met his gaze over the rim of her macchiato, the foam a delicate crown. Ethan sat beside her, a subtle sentinel, his fingers drumming a subtle rhythm on the table's scarred oak, a Morse code of solidarity only she deciphered. "Family." She echoed the word, tasting of ash and almonds. "Isn't forged in headlines or falsified labs, Nathan. It's in the soil my mother turned with her own hands, the nights she sang me to sleep with promises of tomorrow. If you're truly blood, prove it. Mount Sinai, tomorrow morning. Blood draw witnessed. No more shadows." His laugh was a brittle thing, like autumn leaves underfoot, but his eyes cool, as river slate betrayed the flicker of a cornered fox. So dramatic. The report's ironclad, but fine for unity's sake. 11 a.m. And Ethan, do bring your guard dog. Wouldn't want any mishaps. The barb landed soft, but Danielle felt Ethan's tension coil like a spring beneath the table, his knee pressing hers in quiet warning. Keddy. Sleep that night was a fitful tide, pulling her under with dreams of Napa's mists, her mother's silhouette against the dawn, whispering, "Roots, run deeper than rivers, child. Trust the ones that hold." Ethan lay beside her on the guest room's divan, insistent on proximity, not presumption. Their hands linked across the quilt, like lifelines in a squall. No words passed, just the rise and fall of breaths sinking in the dark, a prelude to the morrow's reckoning. Mount Sinai's corridors gleamed sterile under halogen halos, the air laced with antiseptic, and the faint underlying tang of hope deferred. Danielle arrived flanked by David, his arm, a steady branch lined with the silver of years and quiet atonement, and Eleanor briefcase in hand, like a shield. Nathan and Marissa waited in the antechamber, a study in contrived poise. He in crisp chinos, she in Chanel tweed her pearls, a noose of old grievances. Marissa's gaze raked Danielle like frost on a windowpane. Envy distilled through decades. The woman who'd been David's fleeting harbor, after Isabella's light, had first dazzled him, only to be eclipsed by a love profounder than rebound's shallow waters. The phlebotomist, a kind-eyed woman with a lilt from County Kerry, moved with practiced grace vials, filling crimson as confessions unspoken. David first, then Nathan. The needle's prick, a punctuation to the silence. Danielle watched her mother's pendant warm against her skin, a talisman against the chill of what might come. Ethan stood at the periphery, his phone buzzing faintly texts from his own network of shadows. Tech whispers tracing digital breadcrumbs back to Marissa's offshore accounts. Hours stretched like taffy in the waiting lounge. The wall clocks tick, a metronome to mounting dread. David paced, murmuring apologies, like Ave Marias. It was one night, Danny, a boy's folly, before I knew what forever meant. Your mother. She was the vintage that ruined me for all others. Danielle squeezed his hand. Forgiveness a slow pour, like decanting grief, to let the sediment settle. We face it together, Dad, like always. The doctor emerged at last, envelope in hand, her face a mask of professional neutrality, cracking into quiet sorrow. Negative match, she announced, voice, Thamas's snowfall, on vines. No paternal link between Mr. Ellis and Mr. Harper. The prior report was manipulated. The room fractured. Marissa's composure splintered first, a gasp, like shattering crystal, followed by Nathan's pallor draining to parchment. Danielle rose, the world narrowing to the man who'd worn brotherhood like a stolen cloak. You, she breathed, stepping forward, palm connecting with his cheek, in a crack that echoed off the linoleum like judgment's gavel. The slap wasn't fury's blaze, but grief's quiet thunder, the ache for the family she'd guarded, like a sacred grove, now desecrated by ambition's blade. You staged the knife in the alley, didn't you? To play savior to worm into our trust. All for a handful of hillside acres and a vault of stones that hold no warmth without her hands on them. Nathan recoiled, hand to his reddening jaw, eyes darting to his mother like a child caught in the pantry. It was business, Danielle. Harsh, but business. Ethan's voice sliced clean, stepping forward with the poise of a man who'd coded empires from garages, his arm encircling Danielle's waist, a bulwark of quiet steel. No, this was vendetta, Nathan. I traced the wire transfers 50 grand to a ghost in Queens, the same ghost who vanished into your family's town car post-attack. Marissa, you orchestrated it, all the forged DNA from a lab tech on your payroll, the heroic, pushed to position your son as kin. Envy's a bitter root, ma'am, grew it watching Isabella build what you couldn't. But roots like that poison the soil. Sirens wailed distant, Then near Eleanor's subpoena bearing fruit NYPD in crisp blues flooding the hall. Cuffs clicked like closing chapters, Nathan's protests dissolving into Miranda's litany, Marissa's pearls scattering like defeated hail as she was led away. David turned to Danielle, tears carving channels in his weathered cheeks. "Forgive me, my girl, for the shadows I cast." She pulled him close, the embrace a bridge over chasms, bridged by time. "Shadows pass, Dad. It's the light we choose that endures." But as the doors swung shut on the Ellis's farce, the weight crashed, sobs racking her frame, knees buckling like overripe fruit under autumn's first frost. Ethan caught her, guiding her to a bench in the corridor's quiet bend, his arms a haven of hewn pine and steadfast heart. "Let it out," he whispered, rocking her gently, his shirt dampening with her tears. "You've carried empires alone too long. Let me share the load." In that sterile limbo, amid the beep of monitors and the hush of healing halls, Danielle lifted her face to his eyes, swollen but clear as Napa's post-rain skies. "You saw through it all," she murmured, fingers tracing the line of his jaw stubble, rough as truth unearthed. "From the first cluck of that foolish hen to this. You saw me." His kiss was rain on parched earth, soft sustaining lips, meeting in a vow sealed without words. The world fading to the salt of shared salt, the steady thrum of pulses entwined. No conquest, no crescendo, just the profound simplicity of arrival. Two wanderers finding harbor in each other's gaze. As the sun climbed higher, gilding the hospital's glass facade, Danielle leaned into him. The mosaic pendant, catching light like a promise, kept deception's threads severed, love's tapestry, woven a new thread by resilient thread. The sterile echo of Mount Sinai's corridors faded into the rearview mirror like a half-remembered dream, but its revelations clung to Danielle Harper like the faint scent of hospital linen, crisp, unyielding, a reminder of fractures mended and truths unearthed. She rode in silence beside Ethan, the SUV's leather seats cradling her as they wove through the midday snarl of the Brooklyn Queens Expressway, the East River, a fleeting silver thread below. Nathan and Marissa's indictments would unfold in courtrooms of polished oak and stern gavels, their empire of envy reduced to footnotes in tomorrow's Post. Yet victory tasted bittersweet, like the last sip of a Cabernet gone over, leaving sediment on the tongue. Danielle pressed her mother's mosaic pendant to her lips, its jagged edges smoothed by time and touch, and felt the weight of what remained, a father, humbled, a legacy intact, and a love tentative, profound, asking her to step beyond the thorns. David's suggestion came softly over lunch that afternoon, served on the penthouse terrace, amid the rustle of potted figs and the distant honk of ferries. "The Hamptons' house," he said, fork, pausing over a salad of heirloom tomatoes, their red flesh a vivid echo of Napa sunsets. "Your mother's haven. Go there, Danny. Breathe the salt air. Let the waves wash it clean. I've handled scandals before. Remember the Uzzo 8 crash when the vines froze solid and we danced anyway? Eleanor will quarterback the press. You. Just be." His eyes blue as faded denim held the quiet plea of a man who'd bartered his youth for boardrooms, only to find redemption in her gaze. She nodded, the gesture small but seismic, a bridge rebuilt stroke by forgiving stroke. By dusk, they were en route, the city yielding to the low hush of Long Island's shore. Ethan drove with one hand on the wheel, the other resting open on the console. An invitation she took, her fingers lacing through his like vines, seeking trellis. The Hamptons' house rose from the dunes like a sentinel of shingled grace, wide porches wrapped in wisteria, its white clapboard weathered to silver by nor'easters' windows, framing the Atlantic's endless murmur. Isabella had claimed it as her retreat in the early years of marriage, a place for barefoot suppers of clam chowder, and whispered plans for the daughter, who would inherit not just acres, but the art of blooming amid salt and storm. They arrived as twilight bled into indigo, the sky a canvas of bruised plums, and the first hesitant stars. Ethan carried their bags up the shell path, his silhouette etched against the porch light, while Danielle lingered at the gate, inhaling the briny tang that carried hints of her mother's perfume, jasmine, and sea spray bottled in memory. Inside the house, unfolded like an old letter, faded quilts on the four-poster seashell wind chimes, tinkling from the eaves, and in the kitchen, David's gift, a wicker basket of local bounty, crusty baguettes from the village bakery wheels, of aged cheddar, and a bottle of their Eau de 5 reserve, corked with a note, to roots that hold. Love, Dad. That first evening they forewent words for ritual. Ethan built a fire in the stone hearth, its crackle a counterpoint to the waves' rhythmic sigh, while Danielle uncorked the wine, pouring measures into mismatched tumblers, hers etched with seashells, his plain as Savannah clay. They ate on the porch swing toes, brushing the weathered boards, the meal, simple bread torn by hand, cheese, melting slow under the moon's pale gaze. "This," Ethan said, lifting his glass, the ruby liquid catching firelight like captured embers, "is what I chased in boardrooms, moments that taste of earth, not ambition." His voice wove through the salt-scented dark, low and unhurried, drawing her into the cadence of his past. The Silicon Valley garages, where he'd coded fortunes from coffee stains and caffeine dreams, only to trade them for Erica's bedside vigils, her hand frail in his as monitors beeped like impatient metronomes. Danielle listened, the swing creaking softly beneath them, her head resting on his shoulder as the fire's glow danced across his features, lines etched not by vanity's knife, but by quiet sacrifices. "You gave it all up," she murmured, tracing the vein along his forearm, blue-ridged as a river map. "For her, for love that doesn't tally ledgers." In the 5 years since Isabella's passing, her final days, a tapestry of morphine dreams and vineyard views. From the hospice window, Danielle had armored herself, in solitude, mistaking self-reliance for strength. Men had drifted through, drawn to the gleam of her title, repelled by the depth of her grief. But Ethan lingered in the silences, filling them not with noise, but with the steady pour of understanding, like rain nourishing parched soil. The days blurred into a gentle tide, mornings of yoga on the dunes, Danielle's form flowing like tidewater under the rising sun, Ethan joining her with the awkward grace of a man, more at home in algorithms than asanas. Afternoons wandered the beach, barefoot prints, erased by combers collecting sea glass, in her mother's old tin turquoise shards, whispering of bottles, long broken, reformed into jewels of their own. Evenings brought the journal again, read aloud by lantern light. Isabella's entries from young motherhood inked with the ink of ink blots and infant laughter, passages of doubt during lean harvests, when David gambled on a risky varietal only for her to plant hope beside him. She forgave the stumbles. Danielle said one night, the words a confession, as they lay entwined on the quilts, the ceiling beams casting shadows like protective boughs. "Maybe I can too." David arrived on the third day unannounced, save for the crunch of gravel under his leased Jag, a vintage roadster, its curves reminiscent of the Mustang he'd driven, courting Isabella under harvest moons. He carried a satchel of legal briefs, but set them aside for a walk along the tide-line trousers, cuffed above ankles, the wind ruffling his silver thatch. "I was a fool once," He began skipping a flat stone across the waves, watching it kiss the surface thrice before surrender. Marissa. She was the pause after a quarrel, a harbor in fog. But your mother, she was the compass Danny, pulled me true. His voice cracked on the memory eyes, fixed on the horizon where sea met sky in seamless blue. Danielle linked her arm through his, the gesture echoing girlhood strolls along these same sands, collecting whelks and worries. You stumbled, Dad, but you rose, and in rising you taught me grace. Forgiveness flowed then not as a dam breaking, but a sluice gate easing open slow, sustaining, watering the roots of their bond anew. With shadows lifted, Ethan chose the porch at sunset to unveil the last veil, his full measure as a man. The tech empire, he said, handing her a slim dossier over iced tea, laced with mint from the herb garden, wasn't just code. It was armor for Erica's treatments for the scholarships I fund in understory schools back home, where kids like I was tinker with salvaged wires under live oaks. Pages detailed ventures apps, bridging rural doctors to urban specialists' algorithms, predicting crop yields for smallholder farms, quiet philanthropies seeded in the soil of his mother's resilience. I played the shadow for you, Danielle, because true worth isn't inherited. It's earned like these dunes shaped by storms standing tall. She traced the figures not in awe of the zeros, but the intent behind them, a heart that coded compassion into commerce, much as Isabella had blended mercy into her rosés. In the hush that followed their dreams, intertwined like wisteria, on the trellis, a foundation for women of color, in the arts vineyard scholarships for daughters of migrant pickers, a Napa retreat where grief could be gardened into growth. Together, she whispered, drawing him inside as stars pricked the velvet dome. Their bodies a map of rediscovery, slow explorations, under the quilt's touches that mapped not conquest, but communion. His lips on the curve of her shoulder, her fingers in the salt damp of his hair. They moved as one tide, cresting in whispers of stay, and always the Atlantic's lullaby sealing their vows. The return to Manhattan heralded the winter gala at MoMA, a symphony of crystal and couture, where Harper's new rosé would debut amid Klimt's golden swirls. Danielle prepared in the penthouse's vanity silk gown, pooling like liquid dusk, while Ethan adjusted his cufflinks simple platinum, engraved with a marsh rose from his mother's garden. You're luminous, he said, stepping behind her, hands settling on her hips in the mirror's reflection, their eyes meeting in silvered glass. She turned, pressing a kiss to his palm, the line there etched with promises. The scandal's embers had cooled to ash in the press. David's press conference, a masterstroke of candor. We are Harper's, flawed but rooted deep. Now, as they descended to the gala, arm in arm, Danielle felt the shift, not from heiress to survivor, but woman to partner. Her heart, a vineyard, yielding its finest vintage, yet love, decanted slow, ready to pour. The Hamptons' salt-kissed haze lingered in Danielle Harper's veins, like a cherished vintage, its notes of renewal and quiet revelation, carrying her back to Manhattan with a buoyancy she hadn't known since girlhood summers in Napa. The city greeted them with its familiar symphony horns, weaving through the avenues like impatient threads on a loom. The Empire State's spire piercing the October dusk like a needle threading fate. Yet now, as the SUV hummed toward Midtown, Danielle's hand rested in Ethan's, their fingers interlaced over the gear shift, a silent cartography of the paths they'd traversed from rooftop reckonings to hospital corridors, each bend a testament to love's patient alchemy. The scandal's ashes had settled into fertile ground. David's press briefing, a measured soliloquy of contrition and continuity, had quelled the tabloid tempests, reframing the Ellisie's folly as a cautionary vine pruned to strengthen the rootstock. Reporters lingered at the penthouse doors like autumn leaves, but Danielle stepped past them with chin lifted, her mother's mosaic pendant glinting at her throat like a shield forged from fragility. The Rockefeller Center loomed as their first horizon, its Art Deco grandeur, a fitting stage for the winter jewelry, unveiling a constellation of Harper heirlooms to debut amid the plaza's golden Prometheus flames, eternal against the chill. Danielle immersed herself in the preparations with the fervor of a vintner tending a late harvest mornings in the atelier, where jewelers with steady hands under magnification lamps coaxed emeralds into filigree cages evoking the wild grace of Hampton's dunes. Afternoons in fittings, silk gowns, whispering against her skin like confidences shared in the night. Ethan shadowed these rituals without intrusion, his presence, a subtle harmony, fetching forgotten sketches from the Courier, or simply standing at the window's edge, gray eyes tracing her reflection in the glass, as if memorizing the curve of her resolve. Yet beneath the bustle, a quiet current stirred Ethan's silences, once a veil of restraint, now hummed with unspoken intent. He deferred the small choices, her choice of Cabernet for the gala's toast, the sapphire cufflinks he'd wear against his starched white shirt. But in those pauses, Danielle glimpsed the boy from Savannah's marshes, skipping stones into creeks that carried secrets to the sea. One evening, as rain pattered the penthouse panes like impatient fingers, he drew her to the study, David's sanctum of leather-bound ledgers, and a globe scarred from decades of finger-traced voyages. From a concealed drawer, he produced a velvet pouch, its weight modest, but profound. "Open it," he said, voice low, as the storm's rumble settling beside her on the Chesterfield, with the ease of a man who'd long imagined this tableau. Inside lay a ring, not ostentatious, but exquisite, a band of rose gold, warm as dawn on vineyard rose, centered with a solitaire diamond, flanked by sapphires, the hue of Isabella's eyes. Etched inside, from thorns to bloom, E. Danielle's breath caught the stone, catching light like a captured wave, refracting memories of her mother's hand, adorned with a similar band, slipped on under Napa's arbor during a harvest moon vow. "Ethan." The word escaped on a sigh, her free hand tracing the facets, each turn a prism of what-ifs, softened into certainty. In the 5 years since Isabella's quiet departure, her final whisper, a benediction over Danielle's bowed head. "Choose joy, my petal." It's the rarest vintage love had seemed, a distant vintage, bottled beyond reach. Suitors had come with propositions polished as silver, but none had lingered in the cellar's cool hush patient for the settling of sediment. Ethan, though he'd decanted her slowly sip by sip, revealing layers of laughter amid the ledgers, tenderness in the thorns. He took her hand, then turning it palm up his thumb, mapping the lines there, as if reading a script written in starlight. "I waited, Danielle, because rushing a woman like you is like forcing a bud in frost, beautiful, but brittle. From that rainy cemetery umbrella, shielding your tears, while I stood frozen in the downpour to the rooftop, where Ruby clucked her absurd truth. I've loved you in the margins, the spaces where empires pause to breathe. Not for the crowns you wear, the vineyards that sing of your mother's hands, the jewels that capture light like her smile, but for the woman who tends them, fierce as salt marsh grass, bending but unbroken." His voice dipped, roughened by the vulnerability of a man who'd bartered fortunes for family, coded compassion into circuits, only to find his heart's algorithm in her gaze. "Marry me." Not as heiress and guardian, but as equals, in the quiet, waking to your curls, tangled on the pillow, arguing over the last blackberry tart, building something that outlasts the stones, Tears welled unbidden, tracing paths down her cheeks, like rain on a windowpane, blurring the ring's gleam to impressionist soft focus. She saw them then, not in Manhattan's gleam, but in the vignettes her heart sketched, lazy Sundays, in the Hamptons' kitchen. Ethan's hands flour-dusted as he kneaded dough for Erica's cornbread, her laughter mingling with the sea's sigh. Napa evenings under the arbor, David toasting their union with a 98 reserve, his eyes misty with the grace of a father redeemed. Yes, she whispered the word, a key turning in a long-locked door, slipping the ring onto her finger where it nestled like a promise kept. Their kiss followed slow and sealing lips, meeting in the study's lamplight, his arms drawing her close, the world narrowing to the salt of shared tears, the steady thrum of hearts aligning like constellations rediscovered. Word traveled swift. As a courier's dispatch, David arrived at dawn the next day, bearing a bottle of Isabella's private stock, a 92 Cabernet cellared for the day my girl finds her forever. He paused in the doorway, taking in the ring's subtle sparkle against her morning robe, and his face lined with the patina of years and quiet wisdom, cracked into a smile, broad as the Hudson at flood. "It's like seeing her again," he said, pulling Danielle into an embrace that smelled of pipe tobacco and vineyard earth, his voice muffled against her hair. "Your mother always said, love arrives not with trumpets, but the soft creak of a porch swing at twilight, unannounced, but home." Over coffee black for him, laced with cardamom for her, they reminisced in the sunlit breakfast nook David's courting faux pas, like the time he'd proposed with a fistful of wild asters instead of roses, only for Isabella to laugh and say, "Flowers die, David. It's the soil that endures." Ethan listened, his hand on Danielle's knee under the table, a subtle anchor, as David clasped his shoulder. Later, "You've been family since that hospital vigil, son. Welcome home, proper-like." The gala at Rockefeller Center unfolded 2 nights hence, a tapestry of twinkling lights and murmured toasts, the plaza's ice rink a silver mirror underfoot. Danielle glided through the throng in a gown of midnight velvet, its neckline traced with Harper diamonds that caught the chandeliers like frozen starfall. Ethan's arm, a steady compass, amid the swirl of socialites and sommeliers. The unveiling drew gasps, a parure of sapphires and gold, inspired by Hampton's sea glass. Each piece, a narrative of resilience, the necklace evoking Isabella's pearls, restrung after a rogue wave's theft, earrings dangling like vines heavy with promise. As applause rippled, David took the podium, his voice resonant over the jazz quartet's hush. "To legacies not inherited, but illuminated by hands like my wife's, and now my daughter's." His gaze found hers. Then Ethan's, a silent benediction that warmed the vast hall like hearthglow. Later, as guests dispersed into the night's embrace, coats swirling like autumn leaves, Ethan led her away from the clamor up the elevator to the top of the Rock Observatory. The city sprawled below, a glittering quilt stitched from a million dreams, Times Square's neon pulse, the Brooklyn Bridge's luminous arc, the distant shimmer of the Sound. He drew her to the railing, the wind lifting her curls like a lover's breath, and from his pocket produced a small box, not the ring's twin, but a locket of woven gold inside an inscription from Frost. 2 roads diverged, and I took the one with you. Our vow under these lights," he said, fastening it around her neck, his fingers lingering at her nape. Not an end, but the vintage yet uncorked. She turned into him, the skyline a halo around their silhouette, and kissed him there, deep unhurried, the city's hum, a distant hymn to their becoming. Below, David watched from the plaza, a faint smile playing on his lips, the weight of years lifting like mist at dawn. Love he'd learned across decades with Isabella wasn't the grand vintage hoarded for show. It was the everyday pour, shared in sips, savored in silences enduring through every season's turn. And as Danielle and Ethan descended hand in hand, the path ahead unfurled, not as a road diverged, but converged toward Napa's vows. Savannah's welcomes a life woven from the threads of forgiveness, fidelity, and the quiet bloom of hearts aligned. 2 years slipped by like the gentle pour of a well-aged Cabernet, slow, deliberate, each season revealing new notes of depth and warmth in the lives of Danielle and Ethan Brooks Harper. The wedding had unfolded not in Manhattan's glittering frenzy, but on a bluff overlooking Malibu's azure curve, where the Pacific's whisper met the Santa Monica Mountains in a timeless embrace. It was June, the air thick with jasmine and the faint brine of kelp forests. The kind of day Isabella would have deemed vintage, sun-drenched, yet mercifully cool with gulls, wheeling overhead like punctuation to vows exchanged under a canopy of wild bougainvillea. Danielle had chosen silk the color of ripe merlot, its bodice embroidered with subtle vines that traced her silhouette, like a lover's memory, the train pooling on the grass like spilled dreams. Ethan in linen, the shade of Savannah dusk, stood tall as the coastal oaks, his gray eyes locking on hers, with the quiet ferocity of a man who'd bartered shadows for sunlight. The guest list was intimate, a mosaic of souls who'd weathered their tempests. David dapper in seersucker with a boutonniere of blackberries, Isabella's favorite. His arm looped through Erica's, the two widows finding unlikely kinship over shared tales of remission and resilience. Erica, her silver hair braided with seashells from Georgia's shores, squeezed Danielle's hand during the exchange. Hearts like yours don't break easy, dear. They bend like marsh grass in the gale and come back stronger. Lila, Danielle's steadfast friend from the rooftop revels, served as matron of honor, her laughter a buoy against the waves' rhythmic hush. And there in the front row sat Eleanor Voss, pearls gleaming like river stones, her ledger of legal victories, now a footnote to this chapter of unassailable joy. The ceremony wove personal threads into its fabric readings from Isabella's journal, her script inked with the wisdom of a woman who'd tilled both earth and heartache. Love is the rootstock, my darlings. It anchors through frost and feeds the bloom. Ethan spoke first, his voice a low timbre, honed by boardrooms and bedside vigils. Danielle, you were the light in my margins, the woman who turned a fool's confession into a lifetime's vintage. From ruby's cluck to this bluff's breeze, I've learned that love isn't coded or conquered. It's cultivated one forgiving dawn at a time. Tears traced her cheeks as she replied, the ocean's murmur underscoring her words. You saw me, Ethan, not the crown, but the woman beneath thorns and all. In your arms, I've found not just a partner, but the soil where my roots can finally rest. Rings exchanged his, a band of platinum etched with marsh roses hers, the rose gold solitaire, now flanked by eternity diamonds, their kiss sealed under the arbor, salt-laced wind lifting veils like blessings from the deep. The reception unfolded on the terrace of a cliffside villa, lanterns swaying like fireflies in the twilight, tables laden with low-country low and slow barbecue. Erica's recipe for pulled pork simmered with apple cider vinegar and whispers of smoke, and Napa's finest platters of artisanal cheeses, veined with blue like forgotten rivers. Figs split open to reveal their honeyed hearts, and flutes of the 005 Reserve, its bouquet a symphony of black cherry and sun-warmed earth. David took the mic as dusk deepened his toast, a bridge across decades. To Isabella, who taught us that empires aren't built on stone, but on the quiet soil of shared sunrises. And to you too, may your vintage mellow with time rich as the love that carried us here. Glasses chimed like wind chimes in a summer gale, laughter rippling as guests danced on the flagstone patio. Bare feet tracing patterns in the cool grass, the Pacific's lullaby, weaving through Ella Fitzgerald's croon from hidden speakers. Yet the true crescendo came months later at the Harper Vineyards annual Harvest Gala in Napa, a grand affair under the valley's star-strewn vault, where rows of Cabernet bowed heavy with promise, their leaves a tapestry of crimson and gold. Danielle, now 6 months along, moved with the radiant poise of a woman blooming from within her gown, a cascade of ivory chiffon that draped like mist over the hills. The subtle swell of her belly, cradled by a sash embroidered with tiny grapes, a nod to the life they'd nurtured in quiet mornings of nausea and wonder. Ethan's hand splayed protectively over the curve during those first fluttering kicks. The event marked the launch of their joint venture. Roots Renewed, a line of sustainable wines funding scholarships for women vintners of color, each bottle labeled with a mosaic inspired by Isabella's pendant shards of loss, reforged into legacy. As the sun dipped behind the Mayacamas, gilding the vines in alchemist's fire, Danielle ascended the wooden stage amid the crush of patron sommeliers, in tweed philanthropists with eyes bright as polished agate, and David beaming from the wings, with Erica at his side, their hands linked in the easy affection of late-blooming friendship. The microphone felt like an old friend, cool against her palm, the crowd's hush a canvas for her words. "Good evening and welcome to the heart of Harper," she began, voice resonant as the valley's evening breeze carrying notes of earth and elderberry. 2 years ago, I stood on a Manhattan rooftop clutching a live hen and a stranger's confession, wondering if love could hatch from such absurdity. Tonight, under these vines, my mother once walked her hands in the soil, her laughter in the leaves. I stand with my husband, our child quickening within, and tell you it does. She paused, hand resting on the gentle dome, feeling the flutter, a secret Morse code of we're here. We've weathered scandals that shook our foundations like frost, nipping at tender shoots. But in the pruning we found strength, not in the grand gestures, but the daily decantings, Ethan's quiet vigils at dawn, David's steadfast root, the forgiveness that turns sediment to silk. Love, my friends, isn't the rare bottle hoarded for show. It's the everyday pour shared in sips over kitchen islands, savored in the silences, where empires pause to breathe. It's choosing every frost and flourish to tend the garden together. Ethan joined her, then his arm encircling her waist, the crowd erupting in applause that rolled like thunder through the arbors. David approached, pressing a flute into her hand. The 92 uncorked, at last, his eyes glistening with the patina of a father made whole. "To forever's vintage," he toasted, voice thick with the gravel of years well lived. As glasses lifted, Danielle caught Erica's nod from the crowd, her smile a beacon of kindred spirits, widows who'd gardened grief into grace, now witnesses to this new bloom. Later, as stars wheeled overhead and the valley sighed into slumber, Danielle and Ethan slipped away to the hillside, overlook a blanket spread amid the vines, the air alive with cricket song, and the faint, fermented promise of fermenting barrels. She leaned into him, head on his shoulder, the baby's kicks, a gentle tide against his palm. "Our little rootstock," he murmured, lips brushing her temple, already fierce as her mother. She laughed, soft as sea foam, tracing the constellation of freckles across his nose marks from Savannah summers, now hers to map. In this tableau, vines arching like cathedral vaults, the distant glow of the villa's lanterns. They glimpsed the arc from rooftop riddles to this verdant vigil, love's patient tending, yielding fruit beyond measure. And so, dear hearts who've walked these pages with us, from the sting of secrets to the sweetness of surrender, pause now under your own canopy of stars. What vintage waits in your cellar, uncorked only by a willing hand? Tonight lift that glass to the roads you've traveled, the blooms you've coaxed from frost. Reach for the one beside you, or the quiet corner of your soul, and whisper, to us resilient and renewed, in that pour, may you taste the timeless truth love's harvest is never truly ended, only ripened for sharing.